Hi, my name is Elman Ainsworth. Thanks for tuning in for the episode of APTV. Today I got Ingrid Bakker from Hassell. Ingrid is the managing principal of Hassell's office here in Melbourne. Ingrid and her teams are responsible for our precincts, Melbourne airports, office buildings, retail, and everything and anything, designing things for the future and creating places people love, which is on your website. I saw it this morning. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. We're going to talk to Ingrid about what her customers are doing to plan for the future, how to most cost effectively future-proof your buildings, your assets, and your mixed-use developments, and just see an insight into how these things are thought out and planned in a time when plans are pretty difficult to make. So thank you.
No problem.
How are you approaching retail projects differently, and are you noticing any structural changes to how developers approach retail and mixed-use developments?
Yeah, we're seeing a real change in how the developers are really interested in making sure the retail precincts are really kind of relevant to the context that they're in, really relevant to the community and authentic to the place that they sit in. We're also seeing the experience is kind of almost more important than the product. And a lot of that's to do with online. And I think some of the bigger retailers are doing that well, where they're creating their retail space as more of a kind of showroom. They don't have to have a whole lot of product on the floor. They can do lots of other things with their space. But we're also seeing that kind of Instagrammable moment. There's lots of those sorts of, how do we make people really grab onto something that they want to share with their friends on social media? That's a really big push as well. So lots of developers are saying, what's our wow? Where's our wow moment? Where's our Instagrammable kind of spot?
Are they using retail for those opportunities?
Yeah, definitely. And I think also retailers are recognising that as well. So all about creating the experience over just a bunch of products.
Right. And what are some good examples of that?
Well, so for the authentic space one, we're actually doing some work with Melbourne Airport at the moment kind of reinvigorating the kind of customer experience or the passenger experience, and a lot of that's around the retail offering and making sure that it's really very Melbourne. So we're focusing on curating the retail to being really authentic Melbourne suppliers or brands that were born in Melbourne, and so that when people arrive in Melbourne they get a real sense of the city rather than just kind of the normal generic sort of global brands that you might see in an airport environment.
Yeah, airports have kind of been stagnant for too long, and the traffic's been forced to go past, so it just worked, but no one's really stepped it up to really bring the city into the airport.
Exactly, yeah, and that's exactly what they're looking at doing is really making sure that the first experience that people have of Melbourne is a very Melbourne experience. So it's really fun.
It is fun.
There are also lots of brands are kind of diversifying their product range as well. So, some of the fashion brands have got homewares or they've got fragrances, or they're really trying to expand what they're doing, but using that brand as the draw card.
And Hassell does work for both retailers designing their stores and then landlords creating the spaces.
We don't do a lot of retail traditionally. We do in Asia. We're doing quite a lot in Asia. We've got a really strong retail team over there. So I was talking to our head of retail, our sector leader in retail yesterday, and she was saying, it's just a really fast changing space at the moment, the retail space, and there's so much in the technology and the online experience and how you engage people with their phone when they're in the retail environment. So all of that's really kind of changed the dynamic of the retail environment when we're designing. But we do a lot of mixed use developments, and there's always retail involved in that. And we're actually doing a little competition at the moment in a fantastic site in the city, high-end retail, and it's about multi-level retail, which has never really been super successful in Melbourne like it is in, say, Singapore, where there's multi-level retail everywhere. So that's a really, really big challenge to try and work out how do you make multi-level retail work.
Giving people a reason to go upstairs.
Exactly. So we're looking at the idea of, the one retail space could be over 3 levels and have a different kind of experience within that brand on every level. So you want to kind of go through and explore the different, maybe it's art, or it's got some connection with food and wine, or it's got some other connection with some other experience. So it's a really interesting space at the moment.
So there's been a lot of changes to working from an office, working from home, etc., throughout the world. In Australia particularly, where do you see office buildings and office spaces going in the next 3 years?
Yeah, it's a really interesting space at the moment, and a lot of the developers are getting their head around it. And what does it mean now that people have had this experience working from home and all of this flexibility? What does that mean for their buildings and their tenancies and the financial side of that, I suppose? So the smart ones are really thinking about attracting people back in. So they have to make the experience of coming into the city better than staying at home. So there's a lot of talk. I don't like using the same sort of comments that everyone's saying, but earn the commute is a big topic at the moment.
Earn the commute.
Earn the commute.
That's a good one.
So, you've got to make people get out of their Ugg boots and, come into the city, put their shoes on. The clever developers are doing is really thinking again about what is that experience that people are going to have when they come to their building, to their precinct. And that's where that mixed use activation is really important. And it's also creating space within their building where tenants can flex in and out of space as well, because a lot of tenants at the moment are saying we don't know how much space we need, we don't know whether we're growing or whether we're shrinking or whether people are going to come in all the time or not. So they're really wanting this flexibility within the buildings that they're in. So having some flexible space, maybe some co-working space within the building. Some of the big developers are looking at that in a big way at the moment.
Yeah, so any new amenity being introduced to buildings now that weren't here 2 years ago?
Look, I think it's not new, but there's going to be much more need for creating outdoor space that's connected to the office space, and that connection to fresh air is going to be a big one. So buildings that can have terraces, rooftops, outdoor spaces within the building are going to be the ones that the tenants are going to gravitate to, because they all just love the idea of an outdoor space. We're designing winter gardens into some of our commercial buildings at the moment. Seek, for instance, that are just moving in this week. Finally, they're moving in this week. We finished the building for them back in July. But they have winter gardens on the eastern facade, which have openable windows, but they're also air conditioned, so the windows can be closed and they can heat and cool the space as required, but they can equally, there's this kind of second facade, so they can close that off, open the windows and have a kind of fresh air environment that feels, a bit more outdoorsy. What's
the most cost-effective way to upgrade their buildings to compete for the same tenants in the A-grade space?
Yeah, I think they do have to compete. They're competing with some A-grade, even the fringe A-grade. So they've got a big competition. I think the big thing for them is sustainability. If they can upgrade their services and create a really good story around sustainability, tenants are very, very, more and more interested in that. Carbon neutral, carbon zero, net zero, all of those sorts of things are very top of mind for a lot of tenants. It will also save the building owner costs down the track to make their buildings more efficient and all of that. But again, the outdoor space, if they can activate their rooftops, any outdoor terraces, or create terraces or winter gardens within their existing building. It's also about just kind of activating any of those unused spaces in the foyer, creating the co-working environments or flex space that people can grow into. We're seeing more and more of the kind of meeting room, training room sort of suites set up in buildings so that all the tenants can use those rather than having to fit them out in their own space.
Yeah. Are you designing restaurants differently in 2021 that you were in 2015?
Yeah, definitely. I think, again, with restaurants, it's about the experience. It's a really, an immersive experience. People want to come. It's almost like, Destasio is like going to an art gallery. You've got the video art on the wall. It's very present.
On Spring Street.
Yeah, it's and the whole experience is kind of a performance. The staff are performing, acts almost.
What's some of the newer and cooler technologies and creative ideas you're seeing being introduced into retail generally from now on?
I think it's all about data, big data. We work quite closely with a company called Place Intelligence, and they get, I don't even know how to explain it all because I don't really understand it all, but they get sentiment data, so they can tell where people are Instagramming something and they can map that so they can see where the sticky spots are. So that then helps us kind of post a design, see how we might need to tweak something or change something, or because we can see where people are gravitating to more and where they're not, maybe. So there might be a space that needs reactivating because people aren't spending any time there, and you can tell this by this sentiment. social media mapping. It's crazy. I think also all the technology around, within shopping centres, it's already starting with the, sort of tracking people's using search engines and their what they're interested in, so that you might be walking past a shop and you'll get an ad for something that's in that shop sent to your phone. So trying to give people relevant content, I suppose, that's going to attract them to buy. So I know retailers are using that kind of technology also within residential and also office buildings.
Hassell's been very involved in the evolving arts precinct in the South Bank building into the CBD.
Yeah.
Is there anything you can share with us on that? And in your view, does Melbourne do public space as well?
Yeah, look, with the arts precinct, what our role is to kind of expand the public realm. So to really create those spaces between those great art buildings that becomes a destination in itself. So between the Arts Centre, the NGV, all of that space behind, across to the ballet building and where the new NGV Contemporary is going to go. So it's a huge area. And the way we approached it, rather than putting a series of paths in there to connect the buildings and then putting some landscaping on the edges of the paths, we created a huge garden, and then we kind of worked out where the paths needed to meander through the garden. So it's going to be quite a special place and quite an experience every time you go there. If you take a different path, you'll have a different experience, and it'll be a way in which people can engage with outdoor space, public space, beautiful garden, but also art, because there'll be a lot of art involved in the
And no
in the
cars
space.
driving through the gardens?
No cars at all. No cars.
No cars.
No cars.
Right.
Yeah.
And how are we doing on public spaces?
Look,
generally?
I think we do pretty well on public spaces. I think we've had a long history of integrating public art. I think we like putting our culture on show. I think we have an amazing festival calendar, which obviously has had a big dent in it over the last 2 years, but I think that will bounce back. So, almost every month there's another type of, the Food and Wine Festival, the Melbourne Festival. There's all these sorts of great activities that people can come and engage with. I think things like the M Pavilion has been a great addition. That's really activated the King's Garden there, and also the NGV installation, the temporary installation competition that they run every year, has been activating that space behind NGV. So yeah, I think we do pretty well. I think we can do better. We can expand on what we're doing.
But there's certainly a sense of community and belonging,
Definitely.
and that kind of draws more people all the time and grows it.
And I think the City of Melbourne are very focused on it. They know that activating outdoor space is going to bring people back into the city. So they've got lots of different programs running, activating laneways, the Green Line project. There's a lot of things happening at the moment that are going to make the city fantastic.
It's a tough job, and you have the same job because you're making decisions that are going to outlive your lives. This will be around for 50 plus years, and who did that? Some good, some bad, but someone has to live with that forever.
At Hassell, we try and think about in 100 years.
Yeah.
What will this be? So that's
about 100 days ahead of you.
Yeah. So it's a really big question. And I think one of the interesting things around the commercial space is that base building owners and tenants aren't not necessarily on the same timeline. So, a tenant's looking at the next 2, 3, 5, maybe term. 10 years. The base building owner is looking at an asset that's going to be there for 50 to 100 years. So how do we make sure that the design is future-proofed, is sustainable, is thinking about that long term while still responding to the immediate needs of the tenant? I think that's a really interesting kind of dynamic at the moment.
I hope you get something out of this interview. Thanks for tuning in.